Presented exclusively by Mother's Polish.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Slipstream Podcast. And guess what? Formula One returned from their summer break with cars back on the grid for a full weekend of action at the Belgian Grand Prix. And of course, welcome to my incredible co-hosts and gentlemen joining us in the Slipstream tonight. Welcome, Sten, Matthew, and Cole Trickle Jr. We'll get into all things Belgium Grand Prix and recapping the action shortly. But first, there was some news that broke this week before the cars got out on the track. I think first and foremost, the biggest announcement of the week that's been long rumored is McLaren officially announced that Daniel Ricciardo is moving on from McLaren beginning next season. So Cole, you've been all over this trackside, all the drama between McLaren, Alpine, Oski P, Danny Rick. Give us your reaction to this.
I'm sad for Danny Rick, but none of us are surprised. It's been a long time coming. So it sounds like the rumor will go Oscar will go to McLaren. We're waiting on that. They have a meeting tomorrow to finalize what happens with his contract with Alpine. We don't know where Daniel Ricciardo ends up. It sounds like he's been reached out to by Alpine and Haas. We expect Williams to maybe make that call as well, but Daniel has said that he only has an interest in racing in Formula One and that he's not going to go anywhere else. McLaren did offer him an additional seat in Indy, but he said he was not interested. He's made $23 million breaking his contract. I expect he will have a seat next year, but I do not know where he ends up.
So speaking of contract breaking and the spirit of integrity in Formula One, there was a little bit of drama with the moving pieces with Oscar moving away from Alpine and some comments that your boy Otmar made about that. I know, Cole, you had some pretty strong opinions about that. What do you think about, Otmar and sort of his trying to put his foot down on the situation when in reality he's got a pretty strong history of doing the same thing himself, doesn't he?
I don't have it right in front of me, but he made the comment that he wishes that Oscar had more integrity, more or less. Because Alpine had paid for Oscar's seat for a handful of years. They've financed him. They've supported him. And the deal was that, if he was not going to race for Alpine, that they had first dibs on what team they could put him in for a few seasons and then take him back. But Otmar, he's been in his fair share of trouble as well. He got fined, I want to say it was $400,000 for copying McLaren's front nose a couple seasons ago. He left Aston Martin high and dry last season after being called out in the media of, hey, you're leaving. And he came out with a whole press release saying that's all speculation. It's not true, blah, blah, blah. So Otmar he really has no ground to stand on. And I think they definitely lose the battle tomorrow for Oscar. And Oscar signs with McLaren. So what happens next at Alpine, we don't really know. There's speculation that we've all been praying for and hoping happens, that Pierre Gasly, the fellow Frenchman, ends up at Alpine, but lots of moving pieces to see how he gets out of a contract and what's next, but lots going on. Super excited about it.
Yeah, I think the next shoe to drop on that is I can't remember the acronym, but it's something like Driver Contract Board or something meets, I believe, tomorrow to deal with the situation between Alpine and Oscar Piastri and sort of his deal. And essentially they want to get money out of that deal, I think, right? And I think the rumors, at least that were floating around this weekend, were that they want to reuse the money that they might get to try to break Gasly out of his AlphaTauri contract, or Red Bull contract, if you will. So, yeah, we kind of hope that. I think, I'm a big Pierre Gasly fan myself. I think he could definitely use a fresh start. Alpine's been, the fourth best constructor this year, which is an improvement on AlphaTauri. But how do we feel about that? Do we think we'd see Pierre get some better results in an Alpine?
Yes, I think he and Esteban have a little history. They go way back, and they're respectful, but I'm not sure if they're friendly. But they've known each other since Esteban's literal first day of karting. I think Pierre said that their parents used to be friends, and convinced Esteban to get a kart. So they go way back. So it'll be interesting to see if they get paired on a team, and if that all happens, I think that Alpine is in a much better spot than AlphaTauri is. And I think Pierre has podium potentials and maybe could get a win or two.
Yeah, I think a lot of us would love to see that. He's obviously French, and so both he and Esteban would both be French drivers driving for the French constructor, which I think would be pretty cool for them. So it looks like we'll have some final resolution on sort of the silliest part of silly season with McLaren and Alpine here sooner than later. The second piece of news that dropped over the weekend was that Audi officially announces its entry into Formula One beginning in 2026. So, Sten, do you have any thoughts on this? Why should we care? And does this mean there'll be an 11th constructor?
I don't think we'll see an 11th constructor. I think the teams like getting their bonuses from the FIA and being in Formula One. So I think there were, 12, 11 teams a handful of years ago, probably a decade. Actually, not even that, probably 6 years ago. But they don't want to share the pot. So I don't think that we'll see a new team. I think you'll see the evolution of the Alfa Romeo into the next 2 years will become Sauber, which they just lose their manufacturer headline, their title, and then I think they shift into the Audi, which it'll be nice because they're actually creating their own power units now. So now we won't have 5 Ferrari power units. We'll have an actual Audi unit with the new regulations in 26. So I think it'll be exciting. It'll be cool.
Yeah, I'm excited. Another German manufacturer getting into Formula One is a good thing, and I know Porsche's been rumored for a while, so there may be another entry here soon. The third piece of news, before we get to it, I just want to say Martin Brundle broke this with the FIA president, but his walk down the grid at the beginning of the races is just magic. Interviewing people, interrupting people, you name it. It's one of the best parts. If you don't watch the pre-race, do it for that because his grid walk is unbelievable. But the third piece of news that Martin helped break was that Spa, which is the name of the track in Belgium, will be returning and will be on the calendar for 2023. I think for a lot of F1 fans, this is great news. The other piece of the rumor is that this will be that Spa will be a part of a rotation, likely beginning in 2024. So, Matt, I know you're a big Eau Rouge guy. How do you feel about Spa sticking on the calendar and ultimately being rotated in the future?
I mean, it should. I mean, it's the fourth most racetrack in F1 history. It's one of the most exciting tracks. It's got the most exciting sector turn in F1, in my opinion. I don't even know why it would go on rotation. In my opinion, they should do there's like 5 or 6 untouchable races, tracks that are raced every single year. And then the other 17, 18 races are essentially on a turn, every other year or whatever, out of like a handful of, 25 races or so. I mean, I'd say you get Silverstone every year, Monza every year, Monaco every year, Belgium every year, Austria every year. And then the rest are just cycled through. We just keep wanting to add tracks and say, well, these just have to go by the wayside. I don't know why any have to go by the wayside, and I don't know why a track as legendary as Spa should be going on a rotation. It should just be every single year. It is one of the best tracks in the circuit.
You brought up Monaco. How do we feel about Monaco? Like there's nothing ever happening there. The race is won on Saturday unless Ferrari messes up.
Yeah, you beat me to it, Sin. I was actually going to ask that as a follow-up. If you had to get rid of one, are you getting rid of Spa or Monaco?
Monaco.
I'm getting rid of Monaco.
Can't get rid of Spa. Well, they say that Spa is going to rotate.
Yeah,
I do not believe they will rotate that track. It's so iconic. And y'all saw how beautiful it was with all the new grandstands, and they did tons of renovations to the track. It looks great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd get rid of Monaco too, but it's a parade. It's an F1 parade at this point, and they can't do anything to the track. They can't widen it. They can't make it, easily accessible. The cars have gotten so wide. But yeah, if you're gonna do one or the other, it's Monaco. But I still feel like you have to keep them both in. You can't get rid of Monaco.
Yeah,
It is interesting that didn't they delay the start of the Indy 500 this year because the drivers wanted to watch Monaco, and because they had the power outage on the start finish line and they delayed the race and then it was a timed race, they like talked about delaying the Indy 500 so that the drivers could watch it.
Yeah, I think that's where the plus side to Monaco, as everyone knows, is that it's the pageantry. I mean, you could ask really a non-Formula One fan if they've heard of Monaco, and they probably say, "Yeah, I've heard of it." But that doesn't mean it's good motor racing. So you have to balance the history and the pageantry with the action on the track. And for me, just give me good racing. So I would keep Spa and get rid of Monaco.
Are you really? Do you really want to get rid of a track that Tony Stark saved the world in 12 years ago?
I forgot that was
I mean,
there.
that's a legendary moment that you can't just get rid of that. I mean, I don't know why we don't celebrate that every single season.
What happened in the last Avengers? I didn't see the end. Did someone, Tony Stark? We won't spoil anything here on the Slipstream podcast. We'll move on. But speaking of Spa, which we've mentioned a few times, for those that don't know, Spa is the nickname of the track in Belgium. I believe that's actually the city that it's located in. So now that we're back on the track, what was everyone most excited about coming back to racing this weekend? For me, it was really seeing Eau Rouge. I know we posted something about it on social media. Just the point of view in the helmet cam of drivers going up Eau Rouge is unbelievable. To me, it's breathtaking. We all play F1 2022 and have played the other games for years. And even in a video game, it's partially terrifying. I can only imagine what it feels like to be in a real car going up Eau Rouge. So that's what I was most excited about. Cole, what were you most excited about getting back to racing after summer break?
You get that itch after a couple weeks. But I would say I was really excited to see where Ferrari was going to drop the ball. Knew it was coming. We all knew it was coming. Yeah. So I was just waiting. I had a little mishap in practice or in qualifying. We won't get into it right now, but yeah, I was waiting to see what Ferrari was going to do.
Matt, what about you? What were you looking forward to most?
We predicted, I think about everybody. I think I waffled on it, but we're predicting about what Mercedes was going to do in the second half of the season. So I was kind of excited to see how well they were going to perform coming out of summer break. So that was kind of one where they're going to be able to be what we expected them to be in the first race.
Sid, anything from you other than Max looking beautiful?
No, I think I was really looking forward to a track that, as Matt had said, is raced year in and year out. All of the drivers know it. It's used in multiple different categories. And having something change where you're adding gravel traps, where cars are used to having the ability to bail out on a failed overtake or someone going wide and not giving the respect that they needed. And they pretty much had to revisit all of those turns, and you could see it, how much they had to bail through some of those, into turn one, going down the straight. Like that, it was really cool seeing how they had to adapt on that wheel-to-wheel racing on a track that they've known for probably their whole lives, honestly.
The gravel pit edition that we talked about that last week, looking up to this week, was definitely interesting, especially for turn one. We'll talk about this a little bit as we get into the race. It definitely had at least a small impact for at least one moment during the race today. But let's jump into practice and qualifying. Did anything in particular stand out in practice other than weather and some red flags? I feel like we didn't get a really good sense of overall performance in practice, but qualifying was interesting. It was a bit of a bizarre qualifying. In the sense that we had so many drivers taking grid penalties for new engine parts and pieces. It kind of made for a wild qualifying session in a jumbled up grid. Any initial thoughts from you guys on that?
I believe.
Yeah, I think Spa is historically a track where you start seeing those grid penalties because it's a track that is pretty easy to overtake. It's a power hungry circuit. If there are teams that need to get a new power unit in the second half of the season, this is a good opportunity to get it into the rotation because you're not going to take it at Zandvoort. You're not going to take it at Singapore. You need to take it at the Monza or the Spa. But this track is much easier to overtake than Monza, surprisingly. So I think it was you could kind of anticipate that some of the teams would do it, but I think as more teams started tacking into it, it just became, what is it, six different teams took a new unit or a gearbox.
Yeah, if a team takes a grid penalty now, does that mean they're more likely to get more later, assuming they have other failures? Like, are they moving that forward in the line? Is that something to keep an eye on in the next 8 races?
So the first time you take a power unit, and I think we started seeing this a lot with Lewis last year, where like the first time you take a new internal combustion engine, so the ICE, the acronym, or the hybrid system, so that would be like your battery or your MGUK or MGUH, motor generating unit from kinetic or hybrid energy or heat. Sorry, kinetic or heat. But the first time you take that penalty, you take the full brunt of the penalty. I think it's 10 grid places per half of that engine. And every subsequent penalty that you take is only 5. So, yes, you will start seeing penalties as you keep going through the year. But the first penalty you take is going to be the worst. Every one that you take beyond that isn't as bad.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do have a question related to grid penalties. So for those that watched, Max obviously put down the fastest lap. So theoretically, he was the pole sitter. However, he had grid penalties, so he moved to the rear of the field. And Carlos Sainz ultimately was the person who started on pole. So just sort of a random question. Do we feel like that the drivers that are taking grid penalties should be allowed to participate in qualifying? Matt, what do you think?
I mean, I think you've got to, especially if there's if you had like, what was it, 5 or 6 or however many did it, you've got to somehow sort that back of the field out. If it's only one person, I mean, outside from the team perspective, I don't see the point in it, but you've got to have them in there to sort out the actual people that have the grid penalties and where they're going to follow.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point because, if Max got to start in the best position of all of those who took grid penalties, with one exception. This is sort of my funniest stat. I don't know if you guys saw this, but it's about Valtteri Bottas. So 2 stats. One was this is his first time not getting through Q1, and I don't know how many races. A long time. Did you know the exact number?
So 157, something since like 2016.
Yeah, so unfortunate for him. However, this is the fun stat about Bottas. So he actually received 30 places worth of grid penalties, but not an actual rear of the field penalty. So he qualified like 19th in Q1, got eliminated in Q1, and had 30 places worth of penalties. But since it wasn't technically a rear of the field, he started the race 14th. So 19 plus 30 places, basically 49th, but he still got to start 13th, which is pretty funny. We'll talk about his race in a minute, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I think a couple other notes about qualifying. Red Bull, specifically Max, even though he had the grid penalty, seemed like for the whole weekend was the class of the field. Matt, you said your entry coming into this weekend was Mercedes, and ultimately I was excited and anticipating a performance like we had in Hungary and potentially fighting for pole. But they were well off the pace. Lewis was 1.8 seconds behind Max, and George was 2.1 seconds behind Max. They ultimately started 4th and 5th with all the grid penalties, but definitely a pretty disappointing qualifying for them. Anything else you want to talk about with qualifying?
I think one thing to keep in mind, though, how much did Max beat Checo by? 1.1, maybe 0.9. It was still a substantial margin. Max was an outlier this weekend. I think, Mercedes was still 7/10 off of technical pole, right? With Carlos and where he finished. So they really weren't that far.
It was still 1.2 to Carlos.
Yeah, but we'll get into the race pace. Like
it's a long lap, so
yeah, they were there. The directives didn't do what they thought it was.
I think the other surprise too was Alex Albon qualified P9 and ultimately started the race P6. So it was exciting to see the Williams that far up in the grid. The other thing that we'll talk maybe a little bit, or Jordan or someone mentioned the Ferrari debacle. So we had our first one in qualifying. We've got a little audio from that issue in Q3 with Charles Leclerc again.
What's all these tires?
Sorry, it's a mistake.
What's all these tires?
Sorry, it's a mistake.
It's so good you had to play it twice. So they put on, I think, new softs, and they were supposed to be old softs because he was going out to tow Carlos Sainz. And you could hear the dejection in the engineer's voice when he's just like, sorry, it was a mistake. I feel like that comment right there just sums up their season so far, that they had an entire month to work out all of these issues, whether it's communication, strategy, what have you, and they just still messed up.
And it's an important fact because for those who don't pay attention, I don't know what the tire allocations were, how many they're bringing, but that means he burned out a complete fresh set of soft tires, and you only get three sets, I think it is. So he literally wasted it just towing Carlos around for no reason.
Yeah, then the engineer came back on the radio a few seconds later, and they were like, all right, just do the lap. And it's just like, it's frustrating. So we'll get into that with the race, because one thing I want to do if we want to move into the race is I want to get your one sentence race review. And I'm happy to start. This chat about Ferrari and whatnot is sort of alluding to where I'm going with this. Is that mine's simple? I'm done with Ferrari. They've had 14 races. They had a strong car at the beginning of the season. They've had their own set of internal issues that they've caused themselves. They had a month to get it right, and they still didn't get it right. Sure, Carlos had a good race. He finished P2. But they still had multiple times today where you're just like, God, Ferrari, what are you doing? So yeah, mine's just, I'm done with Ferrari. So I'm not necessarily going to root against them, but I'm resetting my expectations for them a little bit lower than we had thought. So Stin, give me your one sentence race recap.
Slight correction, Carlos was third. No chance for getting second. Clear.
That's right, my bad.
Max and Red Bull double world champions this year.
Matt, what's your sentence?
Nothing has changed. We're essentially still what we were last, before the summer break. It's still the same. No big changes.
Cole?
I was going to say the Red Bulls, but I think it was seeing Seb have a fantastic performance. I don't know.
Yeah, I was a little. We talked about this on the last episode. I wanted to see him dance in the gravel a little bit, but we didn't get to see Seb pull his wizardry in the gravel. Yeah, I mean, if I had a second part of my sentence after I'm done with Ferrari, it'd probably be the race was boring as shit. Not to be anti-Formula One here, but I don't know if it was a product of Max dominating or what, but it just outside of the first two laps, and Max charging through the field relatively easy, it was pretty boring. So to Matt's point, it felt like today was worse perhaps than the quality of the product has been this season with the new regulations. But yeah, that would sort of be my follow up to that. It was a little underwhelming. You kind of kept hoping for that late safety car that never happened to spice things up, and it just was sort of a march around Spa, which was a little unfortunate.
And I think Sten kind of pointed to it, and Max was the favorite, and and Sten said that it is a very power hungry type track where that speed is needed and very prevalent. That typically wins out, and you had the best driver in the fastest car with the the best power unit, or maybe not power unit, but best car on that straight line speed, and he just dominated. It was almost just like a perfect storm scenario for it to be that way.
Yeah, so we can talk about the start real quick. I was looking at the wrong sheet when I said Sainz got P2, but he qualified P2, started P1. So thanks for that correction, Stin. He got off to a pretty good start. Checo got swallowed up a little bit, got passed by the two Mercedes, and even Alonso made his way ahead of the Mercedes into turn one. And then they went up Eau Rouge to where I believe Lewis was passing Alonso into turn 5, into the chicane, and came way too far inside. Lewis was trying to make the move on the outside, came across too much on the inside. Ultimately, they collided tires and sent Lewis's car flying almost at a 45-degree angle off the track through the chicane, which ultimately led to him DNFing before the end of the first lap. So obviously unfortunate for Lewis. We did get a couple good things to come out of this, if you want to try to find the silver lining of this Lewis retirement. One was a little bit, I felt bad for him in the sense that there was some commentary before the race that he didn't leave the track till after midnight, crunching the numbers to try to find a way to win the race. And unfortunately, his race was ruined in less than half a lap. But it gave us some good content, like the walk of shame down just the gravel road by himself with the cameraman. I mean, someone could have mashed that up and almost made it like a retirement video. It was like that depressing. I know, Matt, we talked about this, but one, how did they not get a car to him faster? And two, what is Lewis thinking when he knows it's just him and a cameraman on a gravel road?
It's a multi-billion-dollar sport, and their two ways of getting back to the paddock is either walk on some back road way back there, or to hop on and hug the driver of a moped, and that's how you're getting back to where you're at. It boggles my mind that there's no other better way. I mean, I get it. You're on a racetrack and it's, however many miles around and to get back, but it's just comical to me to see this. And then you've got the most popular man in the sport, maybe ever, is just wandering aimlessly by himself with a cameraman. He can hear the cameraman's steps on the gravel. And it's like, it's got to be just the most awkward situation. Do they have a conversation after they filmed them as they walk back? Like, what are you doing all the way back to however many miles it was for him to just trot slowly with his head down back to the paddock?
I think he turned help down. And he also got in trouble because he, the sensor, the safety sensor, when he slammed down, was enough G's that it warranted going to the hospital to get checked out. And he declined it and got in trouble for that when he said in an interview after the race, it nearly broke his back. Before we jump from Lewis really quickly, a couple of quick stats. That's his 6th DNF. No, sorry. 3rd DNF in the last six years. He also, this is the 5th time in 302 races that he's been retired on the first lap. 3 of them have come in Spa.
That's interesting. I guess in fairness, I don't know. I can't prove this yet, but maybe slight correction said. I think the reason why he got warned for not going to the medical facility is because he's still walking. He hasn't made it back yet. No one picked him up. But the other sort of interesting commentary, and Cole, I'm sure you'll have thoughts on this, was Alonso's radio call, basically talking shit about Lewis not knowing how to drive when he's in traffic. I mean, that was a pretty hot take by Fernando.
Yeah. He says, yeah, what an idiot, closing the door from the outside. I mean, we had a mega start, but this guy only knows how to drive and start in first. Yeah, I mean, Fernando, we know Fernando goes elbows out. Lewis and he took full responsibility post race. He said it was his fault. He was in his blind spot. So respect to Lewis for owning it. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible that Fernando didn't have any major damage. Honestly, I mean, he made it the entire race without. I mean, Lewis literally drove over him. He drove up and over his tire. But yeah, Fernando was pretty hot, and I don't even think Lewis. He didn't want to hear post race what Fernando had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lewis is second in wins without being on pole position behind Schumacher. So who knew that Fernando could drive at an elite level and give Skip Bayless a run for his money for sports hot takes while he's going 185 miles an hour? I mean, that's multitasking right there.
I think it was in Austria when he pulled up on Yuki and he had enough time to wave his finger out at Yuki as he was passing him, downshifting coming into turn 4. Fernando is I mean, he's in the GOAT status. He is.
Yeah, I think in the heat of moment he was fired up too. But he went on to have a great race. I got to give one kudos and then one sort of call out a little bit here. Is that Sten? You got both of your predictions for this week right. We previewed the race last week, and Sten predicted Max win and Alonso P5. We'll talk about how Alonso got his P5 here in a moment. But kudos to you. And then, Matt, I do have to call you out because Lewis was your winner and surprise driver coming into Belgium. And I think he made it 2/3 of a lap and is still wandering down a lonely gravel road to nowhere.
It could still be one of two. Surprise driver of the week, not even making it through like sector 1.
That's true. DNFing on lap 1 could have been a surprise.
Yeah.
We didn't see it coming.
And do you guys know what else happened from that Alonso Hamilton contact in turn 5?
Valtteri beaching it?
Max had oil all over his tear-off on his helmet, which when he threw it off and into the track, where did it go, Cole?
Yeah, Ferrari. I'm waiting for my audio. I was waiting for my no there. I figured that was... No!
I do have... How can you throw something onto the track?
Yeah.
All the drivers do it. It's been happening for years.
It doesn't make like... I mean, I get it.
How does Seb feel about this? They're just littering on the track.
Yeah,
is that why he's retiring?
That's why he goes and picks up the trash post race every week.
There was something on Reddit that I saw before we hopped on that was like, hey, just put a little like plastic container on the inside of the vehicle, and then when you pull your tear off, you just throw it in your little trash can. And when you pull into the pits, you empty out the trash can.
It's like the cup holder trash can that we all have in our cars because our kids have stuff everywhere. Just give them one of those. Yeah, no big deal. But the irony, so Sten, you brought it up, but yeah, so Max pulled off a tearaway off of his visor, which they have, I don't know how many throughout a race. And then Leclerc was however many cars back, and it got stuck in his brake duct, which caused some smoking. So that was, I wasn't going to go the no on that one, Cole, just because that wasn't really self-inflicted. That was just sort of an unfortunate situation. But yeah, that forced Leclerc to come in a little early because they had smoke coming out of the front right tire or wheel. And then so they swapped tires, pulled it out, and he was sent on his way. But caused him to drop back a handful of spots that he wasn't anticipating.
It really felt like it was the Super Mario Kart banana peel. It looked like Max just dropped a banana peel out the side, and Charles sucked it up. And it's the odds of it happening, I feel like, are 1 in a million, and the fact that it happens to the top 2 championship drivers in the very back of the pack is incredible. But it just seems to be that Ferrari's MO is not great luck, not great strategy.
Yeah, I thought the other thing going around social media was a little bit funny with the still picture of Lewis's car at basically a 45-degree angle and talking about how they solved porpoising by raising the ride height of the vehicle, and maybe they raised it a little bit too high. But he definitely got airborne. I mean, it was... I'm sure there was a little bit of impact. But yeah, Sten, I think a lot like racquetball trying to hit the ball into the goal. So that's you never knew Formula One was into that kind of thing, but we got some pretty good images of that. And Cole, you had mentioned this. So this, I believe, actually happened on maybe was it lap 1 or lap 2, where Latifi ran a little wide, got caught in the gravel. Yeah, lap 2, got caught in the gravel, spun on his own, which caused, I believe it was Ocon, and then ultimately Bottas to make sort of avoiding reactions, which caused Bottas to then go into gravel and ultimately get beached. So his race was ended pretty early, unfortunately, on
Happy
lap 2.
Happy birthday, Valtteri.
But he's probably laying in a creek somewhere, thinking about what could have been today. We're a little disappointed, not surprised. We all had high hopes for Latifi in the second half of the season, but unfortunately, Latifi was Latifi and caused a bit of an incident that ruined Bottas's race. So a little bit unfortunate there. So, Sten, I know you want to talk about this because you're a Max guy, super Max fan. What happened? What did Max do? Was it exciting for you to see him march through the field? Because I think we got 11 laps in, and Max went from 14th to P1 and ultimately ran away with it today.
I mean, it's always kind of terrifying having a driver who shouldn't be in the back sitting in the back. I think even after the Alonso and Hamilton collision, Stroll went wide coming out of turn 6 into the gravel, entered the track not looking. I've always got the TV up watching the broadcast. I've got, my iPad watching Max and his onboard, and the onboard is a little bit ahead. So I'm watching Stroll just cause all kinds of issues. So you definitely, hold your breath a lot in the first couple of laps, especially while he's trying to make those aggressive moves with not take too many risks. But it was cool. It was great seeing. I know we talked before the broadcast that I think as a Max fan, I think this was more impressive than Lewis last year at Brazil, because he went from 14 to first within 11 or 12 laps with 3 safety car laps. So crazy impressive. But like, that's not great for the sport. But right now he's completely on another level, and you're going to need another constructor to really step it up to challenge them with how they're looking on high speed tracks on this form right now.
Do we want to go down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theory that I think Crofty talked about during qualifying, how he wouldn't be surprised if both AlphaTauris took grid penalties to move out of the way for Max, and it just so happened both AlphaTauris started from pit lane. Anything there with the sister Red Bull team sitting on the sidelines to make it a little bit easier for Max to get through the field?
I think the second Avengers reference of the day. I think Max was inevitable today. He was so much faster. Even they mentioned it on the broadcast that he was a favorite from the sports books, starting in 14th. Like, that's ridiculous.
Max had enough of a lead. He was 14th. He easily could have started in reverse, flipped a 180, gotten down to turn 1, and still been in probably 12th by the time he got to the top of Eau Rouge. He was that much faster than ever. He was in a league of his own the entire race.
Yeah, it's hard to fault anything about Max. The whole weekend, he was clearly... really the whole season. I didn't realize this until they showed it after the race, that Max actually won 9 of the 13 or 14 races. I didn't realize it was 9. I knew he was doing well, but 63% of the races Max has won. And he had 1 DNF or 2 DNF? He had 1 DNF and then 1 floor issue, which caused him at Silverstone, I believe.
So he wasn't technically DNF'd in Bahrain because he completed more than 95%, but he didn't finish the race. He retired 2 laps to go.
Yeah, so, Max was in a league of his own. We had a couple battles for the podium. I was watching George's onboard and forgot about it because he was literally in no man's land the entire race. But good for him to finish P4, a solid result. I think we did get to see a lot of overtaking throughout the middle of the field. There was a lot of teams did 2 or 3 stops. So there was some movement in and around the field, but no big drama. I know a question that I sent to you all while we were all watching it was, a lot of the overtaking happened in the bus stop chicane. Why don't they move to the inside and at least try to block it? Like, I get that if Max is behind you, it's inevitable that he's going to pass you, but it's still racing. Like, why not block him a little bit and make him, go 2 or 3 more turns before making the overtake?
I don't think you can. So if you're on a racing line, you've got someone approaching at speed, you're not allowed to move in front of them, especially while you're in a braking zone. So if you pull out in front of someone who's already going substantially faster, if you look at Alonso getting penalized from 7th to 9th in Canada on the last lap on the straightaway, he pulled onto the racing line and blocked the people that were coming up behind him at speed, and it was considered dangerous and he was penalized.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I don't mean like jerk into the braking zone. I just mean, we do our weekly race nights on Wednesdays on Twitch. And sure, there's a reason we're playing a video game and these guys are doing it in real life. I get that part of it. But if I got Stin rolling up on me like he usually does, I'm gonna stay planted on the inside of that corner, knowing that you're gonna go for a lunge. And it just seemed like they didn't do that in the bus stop chicane, and it just seemed like it made that pass pretty easy. So it's just something curious that I was paying attention to throughout the race.
I think they jeopardize their turns so much by defending the inside that they'll lose out the next turn anyway. So I think if they stay on the racing line, they can do like the old like slow in, fast out through a turn and hopefully try to get back. But if you go on the inside, you're going to have to slow down so much to reach your apex speed that they're going to be completely lost.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, that was the bulk of the race. I mean, you had lap 1, lap 2 incidents with Lewis and Bottas and Latifi, and then you had Max, quickly making his way through the field. You had a little bit of more Ferrari commentary, which was interesting. Obviously, Carlos was fighting. He was holding on to P1 originally, and then fell back to P2, and then ultimately maybe he was going to be fighting Checo for second. And then it got down to he was quite frankly fighting off George coming up behind him for a podium, which was a little bit surprising. And then, 4 or 5 laps to go, we get another interesting audio from Ferrari. Let's take a listen.
Try your best. The last lap was good.
I would love to be in a meeting with Ferrari. I mean, they've got the engineer coming over the radio telling Carlos Sainz to try your best. And Carlos is basically like, I'm pushing pretty hard. So, another head scratcher for me for Ferrari, that just the communication seems so bad. So something's missing there, but I know we've talked a lot about that. I guess the other, and Sten, you can add to this, but we had a DRS train where Albon, I think, made his F1 car about 100 feet wide for, 20 laps.
So you brought it up that he qualified 9th on merit, and then with the penalties, he was 6th. But that car, they looked at the statistics, like the telemetry after the race. Without DRS, he was going as quickly as the 4 vehicles behind him with DRS. They were so fast in a straight line. I think he was even 2 or 3 hundredths faster than the Red Bulls in qualifying in Sector 1. They were so fast. So what ended up happening is anyone that got stuck behind Albon, not Latifi because he was at the back the whole time, they just got stuck. And you could look at all of the footage. There were 5 cars at one point within 3.5 seconds of each other. And Albon, all he had to do was get through turn 1, and he maintained the position through the rest of the lap.
Yeah, he did a great job, and it's good to see Williams get another point. So that gets them up to 4 this year, which is good, because we talked about this again, that they had been struggling for the last couple of years, but another points finish for Albon. He's had, I think, 3 races at Spa, and he's gotten 3 points finishes. So clearly something he likes about this track. So Matt, if you don't mind, recap the top 10 finishers for the Spa Grand Prix for us.
So we got Supermax in first, his teammate Checo in second, Carlos in third, George made a push, but he ended up in fourth, Skip Bayless in fifth, Fernando Alonso, Leclerc in sixth, Esteban in seventh, pod favorite Sebastian Vettel in eighth, another pod favorite Pierre Gasly in ninth, and then the guy that I said who was performing better than we expected in the first half, Alexander Albon in 10th, pulling up the last part of the points.
So Cole, I want to get your thoughts just real quick on this now that I look at it. Another strong race from Alpine, so they've increased their lead for that sort of P4 constructor spot. Do you think McLaren's got a shot to make it interesting here?
I desperately want to say yes with all that I am, but no, I don't believe that they have it. I think that Alpine will continue to slowly creep away. I don't think they'll blow them out of the water, but I don't think McLaren is going to pull it together to get that spot back.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Alpine just seems consistently strong, and Fernando. I mean, even though he's leaving Alpine, he's having a great season, and they're doing something right there. The other shakeup, sort of in the standings perspective, is Checo now moves into P2 in the drivers' standings, so we may have I don't know what you call it, a sweep. Red Bull winning the constructors and going 1-2 in the drivers. We'll see. It's still very close. But leads us to a question that we had from Blake PSU07 on Instagram. Instead, I'll go to you as a resident Red Bull fan. What's the likelihood that Perez holds off and actually gets second in the drivers?
So I think I missed the mark last week when we talked. I said that Checo would be the person that misses out in the top 6 or top 4 or 5, whatever. And I thought he would be the odd man out. The Red Bull is so strong right now. I don't think he'll finish lower than 3rd at this point. They looked so good, and there's so many high speed tracks. Mercedes didn't turn it around with the new TD, so I don't see him getting out of the top 3 in the drivers' championships at this point.
Yeah, I think you mentioned last week that you thought he would be the one that fell out because of team orders and essentially having to use him to be able to get Max to where they want to be in a championship victory. And I think that Max is so good, there doesn't need to be team orders at this point. Like, Max is just so good that they don't need to use Checo for anything at this point. It just doesn't matter. He's going to blow everybody away for the good Lord, I can't speak, majority of the rest of the season. And it's just they don't need to use Checo as a blocking, an offensive lineman or whatever to get him to where he needs to be.
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys on this. And how quickly predictions change. I know, Matt, I think you maybe shared this feeling is that over summer break, you kind of buy into the narrative that Mercedes is back-ish, especially after the performance in Hungary with George on pole and having a pretty solid race all around. And, they even came to the weekend. What did Lewis say? That they're here to cause chaos in the second half of the season. And if chaos was his car going airborne, then he surely accomplished that. But it didn't seem like the fight up front was there like we had hoped, or maybe selfishly I had hoped. Overall, I know that in sort of our one sentence race recaps, I had mentioned that the race was relatively boring. And that was a little bit in part just because Max is so dominant. So it's not to take away from the overall race itself. You certainly appreciate performances like that. You just like to see a little bit more competition and people racing, to the very end for those podium spots. So we didn't quite get that today. But yeah, I think to answer our question from Blake, I'm all in on Red Bull going 1-2 now. There's 8 races left. They've got the best car. They've been the best team. I don't see what gets in their way this year.
I will say one thing going back to Mercedes that at least did pique my interest, that they're at least getting better and whatnot. And they've done it in the last few races too, but I think it was Russell that got DRS and I think it was Leclerc that he ended up passing at one point there, where if you remember in those first like 5-6 races, like Lewis and Russell were getting DRS on like Alpines and Alfa Romeos and couldn't make passes even with the DRS, and they're at least making some up now on those straights with the overall speed, but it's still not enough right now, and I don't think they can even maybe get the second place right now in the constructors.
Yeah, I think Red Bull is by far and away the best team with the best driver. Ferrari is by far and away the team that gets in their way the most. And Mercedes is by far and away the team that seems to have the most frustrating car on the track. So, yeah, all in Team Red Bull. And so before we wrap up the race, we can't, because this technically happened after the race. Well, I guess partially in the race, but Cole, we'll have you give the story here. Ferrari had another blunder with Charles going for fastest lap and then ultimately getting a penalty.
A couple laps to
What
go.
happened?
They call him in. Obviously, they want the fastest lap. Fastest lap gets you a world championship point. They think they have room to get past Alonso to pit Charles in time. So they pit Charles. Charles comes out. Alonso passes him. And eventually Charles gets his spot back to finish in 5th. But after he finishes the race, he gets the call that he went 1 kph over in pit lane due to a sensor that had overheated in his car, that he'd been managing the temperatures. So he went over the pit speed limit. So he got a 5-second penalty, which then dropped him from 5th place to 6th place. So another Ferrari blunder.
Feels like some kind of inside job to make sure that Sten got both of his predictions right. But kudos
Dude,
to you, Sten.
He was 7/10 away from losing out to Ocon.
Yeah, another, which is crazy, 1 kilometer per hour, which I get safety, because they do, for those that don't know, which I didn't know this until I saw Max doing it, is that as soon as they're done, they go around turn 1 and they go into the pit lane backwards. So they don't do a full lap all the way back around the track because it's the longest track, I believe, on the F1 calendar. They literally just go around turn 1 and then go reverse into the pit lane. And so he was going 1 mile an hour or 1 kph too quickly and cost him a couple of points. So unfortunate, but par for the course for Ferrari this year. But speaking about dominance, we get a chance to look ahead to the Netherlands next week. So as a reminder, Formula One was on a month-long summer break, but they're back with back-to-back-to-back weekends. So we have 3 straight weekends of Formula One racing. So we get a quick turnaround here to the Netherlands. So, Sten, what can we look forward to here? Not only about the track, but it looks like Max had another dominating performance there last year. Can we expect more of the same next week in Netherlands, or does the track itself set itself up to maybe be a little bit more surprising?
The raves, the music that you'll hear behind all of the interviews happening are absolutely amazing. And even though I'm not a big dancer, I do love me some Untis music, some big drops. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing some music. But no, I mean you're pretty much spot on with it's a different track. It's not going to be like what we saw at Spa. It's not as high downforce as Hungary or Monaco, but it's a pretty high downforce track. Not super high speed, but also it's only probably a 111, 112 pole time. So it's a pretty quick track, but there's not a lot of overtaking capabilities without that kind of DRS on the main straight. So I don't know if it's going to be as dominant from any team, but I would still think that the way that the Ferrari gets its downforce, Ferrari should, on paper, have an edge on this track at least.
Yeah, I think quick comparison, we had, 44 laps today in Belgium. And then next week we have 72. If it's the same as last year, they had 72. So much shorter track, much different track. They actually have banked corners, which is pretty rare for Formula One track. Cole, I don't know if you know why that is, but I think that is one unique part about the Netherlands track, is that it actually has banked corners, which you don't normally see in at least modern day F1.
No, I actually don't have a great reason why. And they just put the banks in. I want to say it was last year or 2 years ago that they added that steep bank through there. But it's a great track. I'm looking forward to seeing if Max wins by more than 25 seconds and if Ferrari blunders both of their strategies or only Charles's next week.
Yeah, looking at the race recap from last year, we had Max 1, Lewis 2, Bottas 3, and everybody else was a lap down. So don't know if we should expect more of the same this year. I mean, even from 12th onwards, we're 2 laps down. So pretty quick to get around. Going to be a lot of back markers, which could make things interesting. You never know. I look forward to DNFing on this track on Wednesday night in our league race, because that's been my season. But yeah, looking forward to another race weekend. Any closing thoughts from the gang here before we wrap up? Matt, what do you got?
Just another dominating performance from Max. He's just the elite of the elite, and they don't make documentaries over bad drivers. So dominance is king, and he's in that upper echelon of some of the best we've seen. So fun weekend, back to racing. Look forward to Netherlands.
Stin, I think you're going to have to give us a dance move if Max wins by 30 or more seconds next week.
I do have a question for you guys. I could answer it, but I'm a Max fan, so I'm going to answer bias. So there's two records that are really pretty interesting in Formula One. One is the most wins in a season. Schumacher did it. He had 13 of 18 in, I think it was 2004. I might not be right on that, but 13 of 18. Can Max beat that? And the other question is, Schumacher also holds in 2002 17 of 17 podiums. Can Max, with two DNFs and missing out in Silverstone, podium out to beat that record?
Well, I think an interesting part that you mentioned there that I think I saw this earlier. Max has finished on the podium 9 times this year, and they're all wins. So he has no seconds or thirds.
Monaco is third.
Was he? Okay, maybe I saw that wrong. But I thought it was 9 wins, 9. I thought he was 4th in Monaco. 9 wins, or 9 podiums, 9 wins. But maybe something like that. But he's clearly, when he finishes the race on his own terms with a clean car, he's going to win. So I'm going to go yes. He'll break both of those records.
Yes.
I think he at least gets the 13 wins.
I actually, Matt and I were talking about this offline, I think, last week. I heard Max say, I don't know if it was last season or a couple seasons ago, I'd have to find the quote, that he has won more races than he has lost in his career of racing. So you'd have to go back and look at his karting career as well. But I think that stat continues. If that's an accurate stat, I think he could win out almost every race for the rest of the season.
I will say whatever the number was, Austin, that you said for Schumacher, 13 out of 18. That would be 16 wins this year if you go from the same like percentage point. So Max would have to win 7 out of the last 8 to get there. Is that correct? That's an insane amount of wins over an 18 game or 18 race season, and to have to go 16 wins in a season just to match that kind of dominance is
just
pretty incredible.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we're all reactionary. So the feeling we have right now, if Max continues driving like this, there may be an external circumstance that prevents him from being on the top step of the podium week in and week out. But yeah, it was another exciting week. We were all excited to have the Formula One cars back on the grid. Very excited that we get a quick, short turnaround this week. We get to do it again in the Netherlands. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll come back to you guys next week with another episode of the Slipstream Podcast. Take it easy.